On behalf of the City of Vincent, I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to let members of the public gallery know that this evening we will be web broadcasting our meeting as part of our new live streaming initiative, but we don't web stream public question time because we do consider your privacy. So if you do wish to come up and speak to any item on the agenda tonight, you won't be transmitted as part of that broadcast, and we will commence broadcast after public question time has finished. CEO, in terms of apologies and members of on approved leave of absence, I've just been notified by Councillor Buckles that he's running about 10 minutes late. Other than that, we are all accounted for. So we will move straight to public question time. This is your opportunity to come up and address council. You're welcome to come up at any point, address for 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes, but we do ask that you state your name, address and the item on which you're speaking to this evening. So there's no particular order, just come up when you're ready. So for anyone who is joining on the live web stream, we do welcome you to the meeting. We have just completed question time and we are moving to deal with members seeking leaves of absence, and tonight I understand we have 2 requests.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we have a request from Councillor Gonchevsky for leave of absence from 2nd of September to 21st of October inclusive for work commitments. And secondly, from Councillor Toppelberg requesting leave of absence from 31st of July to 5th of August inclusive due to work commitments.
Do I have a mover in support of Councillor Gonchevsky's leave? Just noting that she is attending the States for her fellowship, Churchill Fellowship program, so we're incredibly proud of Councillor Gonchevsky in her pursuits, and we greatly support you in your endeavours. Do I have a mover for Councillor Gonchevsky's leave? Councillor Loaded and seconded by Councillor Murphy. All those in favour? Declare it carried. And in relation to Councillor Toppelberg's leave, mover Councillor Gonchevsky, seconded Councillor Hallett. All those in favour? Declare it carried. We now move to the receiving of petitions, deputations and presentations, and we do have 2 petitions that we are receiving this evening. The first petition is from Mr and Mrs Irwin of Galway Street, who I note have come into the public gallery this evening, so we welcome you. And this is in relation to a request for 24-hour permit parking for residents at the top of Galway Street, closest to the Loftus Street end in Leederville, and that has been signed by 29 residents. So this is actually a matter that will be coming to Council. If I could just ask the Director of Technical Services, my understanding is that the matter of parking restrictions on Galway is likely to come to the next Council meeting in August. Is that the case?
That's correct.
Okay, so this will be considered at our August meeting, which will be the 22nd of August. So can I have a mover to accept the petition? Councillor Harley and a seconder. Councillor Toppelberg. All those in favour? Declare the petition accepted rather. The second petition that we have this evening is in relation to Dejaxo Cafe in Mount Hawthorn. It's been submitted by Damien Nabs, owner of Dejaxo Artisan Bakery and Cafe of 2 Coogee Street, and the petition is to respectfully request the Council to consider increasing the patron limit of Dejaxo Cafe in Mount Hawthorn to 35 in the Eating House approved area. During busy periods, Dejaxo has been forced to turn people away in order to maintain the 15 patron limit, and we're seeking an increase in the patronage numbers to better service the local community. This has just been presented to us this evening, so I'm not sure how many signatures, but if I can hold it up, you can see that there are a number. Again, this is an item that will be coming to Council for consideration. It is the subject of a development application, so if I could just ask the Director for Development Services when that's likely to be.
Through you, Mayor, it's at this stage it's scheduled to be presented to the August Council meeting.
Thank you, Director. So this survey, we can look at the number of signatures and we can have that information included in the report to Council to next month's Council meeting. So thank you to Damien Nabs, if you're here, for presenting that petition. Can I have a mover to accept that? Councillor Harley, seconded. Councillor Loden, all those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. We're now moving on to confirmation of minutes. We've got two lots of minutes here. First of all, we've got the minutes of the ordinary meeting on the 27th of June 2017. Do I have a mover to accept the minutes? Councillor Loden, seconded. Councillor Harley, all those in favour? Declare it carried. And secondly, we're dealing with the special council meeting minutes of the 12th of July 2017. Do I have a mover? Councillor Hallett, seconded. Councillor Loden, all those in favour? Declare the minutes carried. I now would move to announcements by the presiding member. I do have a few announcements to make this evening. First of all, I would just like to note that this is quite a significant agenda this evening because tonight we will be adopting our 2017-18 budget, our corporate business plan and our community budget submissions. All of 2 out of the 3 have been raised by the public gallery, so we will be coming to those items for debate and discussion. In relation to the other items for this evening, I just would like to note that it is the Mount Hawthorn AGM this Thursday night from 7 p.m. in the Braithwaite Lesser Hall in Mount Hawthorn. Mount Hawthorn Hub has just celebrated its 4th birthday and has an extremely exciting year. They recently, as the Vice Chair who's here this evening has pointed out, run some very exciting consultation sessions, particularly with the youth of Mount Hawthorn, and has had a pretty successful Streets and Laneways Festival in May, which drew 70,000 people into the Mount Hawthorn neighbourhood. So the Hub is inviting everyone along to attend the AGM to find out what they are up to, what's in their action plan going forward, but also to ask any Mount Hawthorn business owners and residents to consider joining this team of local passionate people. The other announcement is that this Sunday we will be holding a National Tree Day event, which is something that we like to do every year at the City of Vincent, where we invite our community members along to help us to plant seedling stock as part of our eco-zoning program. This year that will be happening on Sunday from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Leslie Lehman Reserve. So we do invite our community members along to help us plant 500 native tube stocks. We do need the help, so we often get a really good turnout, and we do offer a free sausage sizzle after the hard work, and we will also we'll also be looking forward to having a chat and talking to people on the day. The final announcement for this evening is that we are also looking forward to the Imagine Vincent Cup, which will be happening on the 19th of August, and basically that will be a match between Subiaco and West Perth football clubs at our Leederville Oval. It will be. It has received support through the City of Vincent's festivals and events sponsorship program, and it will involve a range of businesses and community groups. It is a free event for residents, with a lot of the local businesses and the football clubs offering free family passes. So we're really keen to get as many community members along for free, and as part of that we will be having the Imagine Vincent team along, who will be very keen to talk to our ratepayers about our Imagine Vincent community consultation program that we have running at the moment. And I understand that they'll also be hosting a conversation after the game with the stakeholders from the club. So that's good to see Imagine Vincent out and about in the community at these public events. We will now move to declarations of interest. I'll hand over to the CEO because we do have a number this evening.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. We do have several. The first is a disclosure of impartiality interest from Mayor Emma Cole in relation to item 10.2, community budget submissions. The extent of the interest being that one of the community budget submitters, Mrs Anne Bate, provided volunteer campaign assistance to the Mayor during her 2017 mayoral campaign, as has been declared on the City of Vincent gift register. As a consequence, there may be a perception that the Mayor's impartiality on this matter could be affected. The Mayor has declared that she will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly. The second disclosure I've received is from Councillor Jimmy Murphy on item 11.3, which is adoption of the annual budget. Councillor Murphy has disclosed... So through you, Mayor Cole, I'll just seek a clarification from Councillor Murphy, as to whether or not that disclosure ought to have related to item 13.2 instead, the community budget submissions, or whether it might be both. So both adoption of the budget and community budget submissions, if that's the case. Thank you. Councillor Murphy's just confirmed that's the case. Disclosure of impartiality interest relating to both item 11.3 and item 13.2. The nature of Councillor Murphy's impartiality interest is that he occasionally works with YMCA through his involvement with Leederville Carnival. As a consequence, there may be a perception that his impartiality on the matter could be affected. Councillor Murphy has declared that he will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly. I've received a financial interest disclosure from Councillor Jimmy Murphy on item 9.7, Fitzgerald Street Hotel Alterations. The nature of Councillor Murphy's interest in this matter is that his business has a financial association with the Rosemount Hotel insofar as he occasionally books entertainment with the hotel. Councillor Murphy is not seeking Council's approval to participate in the debate or to remain in chambers or vote on the matter. The next disclosure I've received is from Deputy Mayor Councillor Ros Harley. It's a disclosure of proximity interest in item 10.1, the Capital Works update, and in particular in relation to the bicycle network from Oxford Street North between Anzac Road to Scarborough Beach Road. The extent of the Deputy Mayor's interest in this matter is that she lives in the vicinity of the subject works. Deputy Mayor is not seeking approval to participate in the debate or to remain in chambers or vote on the matter. A further disclosure I've received is a financial interest disclosure from Councillor Josh Toppelberg in relation to item 10.2, proposed parking restriction changes in William Street, Perth. The extent of Councillor Toppelberg's interest in this matter is that his family owns a property on William Street in the proposed area for parking restrictions. Councillor Toppelberg is not seeking approval to participate in the debate or to remain in chambers or vote on the matter when it's discussed. And lastly, a proximity interest disclosure from Mayor Emma Cole in relation to item 10.1, Capital Works update, specifically in relation to the traffic calming measures that are proposed along Anzac Road. The extent of the Mayor's interest being that she lives on Anzac Road, where she is an owner-occupier of her primary and only residence. The Mayor is specifically requesting Council's permission to continue to preside at the meeting when the matter is discussed, but not to participate in the debate or to vote on the matter accordingly. On that basis, Council members, I think it is opportune for you to now, should you wish to do so, consider and determine the Mayor's request to participate in that item when it is discussed. If you wish to do so at this stage, then the Mayor would, in accordance with the standing orders and relevant section of the Local Government Act, need to leave the Council chambers. I would request the Deputy Mayor to assume the role of Chair and for Council to then make its deliberation on the Mayor's request. In doing so, Council members, I'll just point out to you that under section 5.68 of the Local Government Act, the matters that Council needs to consider in deciding the Mayor's request to continue presiding at the meeting in light of her disclosure is that Council must form one of two views, and that is, firstly, that the nature of the Mayor's interest is so trivial or insignificant as to be unlikely to influence the disclosing member's conduct in relation to the matter, or is common to a significant number of electors or ratepayers. I would just advise Council that the nature of the Mayor's interest does not satisfy the test for the second item, so Council, in deciding on the Mayor's request, must, if it agrees, form the view that it is so trivial or insignificant as to not be unlikely or as to not likely influence the Mayor's conduct in relation to the matter. So, over to you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Councillors, does anyone wish to make any comment about this declaration? Councillor Lurden.
Just that I'm happy to support the Mayor's participation on the grounds that the CEO outlined in item number 1.
Councillors, any other comments? Yeah, is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Gonchevsky. Okay, all those in favour? Thank you, that's carried.
Through you, Mayor Cole, apologies. That's the. I've received no further disclosures of interest.
Thank you, CEO. We'll now move on to reports. So I'll start by going around the table to see if there are any other items that council members wish to pull from the agenda for discussion and debate. Councillor Harley, do you have any further items? Councillor Murphy?
Just 12.2, thanks.
12.2. Councillor Toppelberg?
Thank you. 9.2, 9.6, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Loden?
10.3.
10.3. Councillor Gondaszewski?
10.2 and 12.2. And that's
Thank you. Just a reminder to councillors that you do not need to mention the absolute majority items. They are automatically pulled out for debate and discussion. Are there any other items? Councillor Buckles? Councillor Hallett? Okay. 13.2 has been mentioned in the public, so yep. All right, great. Okay, thank you, council members. So the CEO will now talk us through which items tonight will be voted on block.
Through you, Mayor Cole, council members and members of the gallery, the following items will now be considered by council for adoption en bloc. They are item 9.3, item 9.8, item 11.1 and 11.2, item 12.1 and item 13.3. All of the other items will be individually discussed and debated by council. Through you, Mayor Cole, apologies. In view of Councillor Murphy's financial interest disclosure on item 9.7, that item will also need to be discussed separately.
Thank you, CEO. Do I have a mover for the en bloc items? Councillor Harley, moved Councillor Hallett. Sorry, moved Councillor Harley, seconded Councillor Hallett. All those in favour? I declare those carried. So we will now move through the reports in order that they have been raised by the members of the public in the gallery this evening. So the first item that was raised was 9.4, which is number 49 Tasman Street, Mount Hawthorn, which is a proposed amendment to a previous approval and extension of term of approval for a single demolition of existing single house and construction of 4 group dwellings. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Loden, seconded. Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, if I could pose a question through the Director of Development Services from the questions that were posed on this item from the floor, specifically in regards to the boundary fence, the height, and also the question around parking that was raised as well by the other person, and what powers does the council have to protect residents during the construction phase from the issues around vibration and noise and so forth?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll try and cover all those issues. Just in relation to the boundary walls and the setbacks to number 47, the application fully complies with the state government's R codes in relation to the boundary wall heights, lengths, and the setbacks. So the council has is not exercising any discretion in relation to those boundary walls. They fully comply with the state government's R codes. In relation to the boundary fence, it's a civil matter between the two owners, noting that an owner has the right to erect a fence that meets the city's fencing local law, which probably the most relevant point is that the fence can't be higher than 1.8 metres and needs to be constructed to the standards specified in the local law so that it's not dangerous and meets all the requirements. In relation to the compacting query that was raised, the applicant will be required to lodge a building permit before undertaking any works on the site. As part of that building permit, they'll be required to ensure that and provide evidence to the city that there won't be any impact on adjoining properties. In this case, given the close proximity of the adjoining dwellings, the applicant, it will be likely that a dilapidation report will be required and provided as part of that building permit to demonstrate that the compaction and the works undertaken as part of the construction of the development won't have any impact on those adjoining properties. If the owners would like a copy of that report, they can contact the builder, and they should have a positive relationship with the builder to ensure that all their issues are addressed throughout the process. Otherwise, they can put in a freedom of information request to the city, and the city should be able to provide that information once all personal details are removed. And again, if there's any issues with the building process throughout, again, the neighbours are able to contact the city or the building commission, and the city will work with the neighbours and the building commission to ensure that any issues that occur are addressed immediately and don't impact on the existing residents in the area. Finally, there's two more things I just wanted to touch on. In relation to the fencing at the front, there was a query about whether there's a boundary wall or a boundary fence located in the front setback area. There isn't anything included in the plans, but again I note that the applicant has the right to build a compliant fence. In this case, the state government's R codes also limit the height further by limiting it to 1.2 metres in height, unless there's an existing fence in that location, in which case that existing fence in all likelihood would have an approval or be exempt because it was constructed prior to that requirement coming into force. And then finally, in relation to the parking, the development does again fully comply with the state government's R codes. There's only 4 dwellings proposed as part of this development, and so no visitor parking bays are required. There's 2 parking bays provided for the residents in double garages for all 4 of the dwellings, so 8 resident parking bays. I also note that as part of the plans there is adequate space for visitors to essentially park in front of any of those 4 garages. So essentially you could get 4 visitors parking in the development. So it's been designed flexibly to allow for visitor parking, though there isn't strictly any visitor parking provided in accordance with the R codes. But practically, there is adequate space for 4 visitors to park within the development site.
Thank you, Director. I guess I wanted to recognise the issues raised by the local residents around this. It's not an enjoyable process having a house constructed beside you. It's always a difficult, painful process because there is noise, there is dust, there are all those sorts of issues. Our processes try to minimise that as much as possible, and we have laws in place to do that, but that is an unfortunate reality of construction taking place. From a council point of view, we can only do what we're empowered to do. We don't have discretion to refuse this on the basis of the height or the basis of the boundary walls issues that the Director has posed. We don't have, unable to take into account considerations such as the health and well-being of the person next door if they have specific issues there. So it makes it difficult for us in this situation. So from my perspective, I'm supporting the officer recommendation to approve this development. It is an existing planning approval that has been in place. I recognise that's not going to be popular for the residents, but I feel that's the appropriate decision in this case.
Seconder. Oh, Councillor Buckles. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just following on quickly from Councillor Loden, look, I too am happy to support the officer recommendation. I do think the report lays out quite clearly that this is an application that conforms broadly with the policies in place, and I can't really see that there's any valid reason for refusal. Cheers.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'm going to speak in support, but I actually just want to address some comments in regards to protection of people who are having buildings built next to them. My original reason for running for council was because of the appalling experience I had with the builder of my building. It ended 7 years later in court. The Building Commission did nothing. I was unable to get any protection of any sort, to be honest. So it is music to my ears to hear the director say that there are processes that the council will assist the owners through. I think you need to hold the city to those words. And I can tell you from experience of 2 years of another building next to me, it does change people's lives. It changes your experience of the area, the noise, the tradies that they bring on site sometimes who are maybe not the best behaved. It is intolerable, actually. And so I guess I would say to many builders who may be in the audience tonight through the chair that I ask you to keep good faith with people who you are building next to, because when the builders and the developers walk away from these places, they leave the person in the houses adjacent to the property that is being constructed, and sometimes that is left, there's damage left, there is poor relations left, and there's stress left. And it is obviously something that for all intents and purposes, this does need to be approved tonight, and I see that the developer has made an effort to be compliant, although not in everything, but it looks like a good proposal. But those are my comments for the record, that I believe owners of properties who have buildings next to them actually have very little protection, and probably something that state government needs to address, and perhaps provide more powers to local governments to be able to intervene and prevent occupancy and final certificates being issued, and in fact prevent building licences from being issued for builders who contravene the original terms of the building licence.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just questions for you to the Director of Development Services. Condition 6.1.3, which deals with the deficiencies of the landscaping plan in its current form, says the provision of additional mature tree planting with a canopy cover at maturity. Does that need to be more specific? I mean, I guess, do we need to specify size or canopy covered in order to ensure that we're not getting mature bonsai?
Through you, Mayor Cole. No, I think that the city's policy defined clearly what canopy coverage is. And though the wording could be improved, I think it adequately covers the intent and the issues we're seeking to address, which is essentially for the landscaping plan to make it clear what the canopy coverage is and what is being proposed.
Councillor Toppelberg, do you have anything further? Look, I did just want to follow up on a few more questions that have... There was one question from Mr Tiziak in relation to access to the building management plan. Director, could you please speak to the access to neighbouring residents to the building management plan?
Through the Mayor, again, the neighbours can contact, I think in the first instance, a relationship with the builder is extremely important, and the builder should provide that management plan to the neighbours. Failing that, a request can be made to the city through freedom of information. The city will be able to provide that information, provided we've removed all the personal information. And the city, again, will be able to work together with the neighbours to ensure that all of those details are clear and the expectations are understood. And if there are any concerns, please contact the city.
Thank you, Director. I also just wanted to go through some of the points that do lend themselves to questions that Bernadette Phillips provided to me. The first is in relation to requiring more on-site parking over and above the minimum prescribed by the R codes, and the second is relevant to that too, in requiring on-site visitor parking to be provided for developments of 4 dwellings or less, and not just for 4 dwellings or more. So, Director, could you please talk through the limitations to the city in prescribing parking above what the R codes permit?
Through the Mayor, if the city wanted to amend the R code, the state government's R codes, to increase the amount of parking required for these types of group dwelling developments. The city would need to get the support of the state government to amend the R codes, essentially. I've been part of that process on numerous times, and the state government's position in relation to increasing the number of visitor bays required for group dwelling developments of this sort has not occurred, as far as I'm aware, and there would need to be a strong justification for why additional parking would be required for this area as opposed to any other area in Perth, as the R codes apply across all of Western Australia, not just Perth. So it's certainly been something that the state government has been made aware of in the past, and it's been considered previously that the number of bays required by the R codes is sufficient. It's an ongoing discussion with the state government, but essentially the city can't change it in isolation. It needs to be approved by the state government if we want to try and change that standard.
Thank you, Director. This might actually be more appropriately directed to the Director for Community Engagement. This is about introducing an on-site street parking permit system, allowing only a maximum number of occupier cars to park in the street immediately abutting their property. Perhaps, Director, if you could just talk through the parking permit situation that we have in the City of Vincent.
Sure. Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, the city's parking permits policy allows any residential property with parking restrictions in their street to have up to 3 permits if they're a single residential dwelling, up to 2 permits if they're a group dwelling, or 1 permit if it's a multiple dwelling. Importantly, but that policy does only apply where there are parking restrictions in a street. If there are no parking restrictions in any given street, then it is literally on-street parking as available. Many streets, as you'd be aware, are not line marked, and therefore it's very difficult to determine exact occupancy. So at this point in time, the city looks to manage its on-street parking only where parking restrictions apply. Where there are no parking permits, it's ultimately a public street that's available for both residents and visitors.
Thank you, Director. One other thing I'll just add to that is in relation to parking on verges, that it is the entitlement of the owner to park on the verge. They do have first entitlement, and if you do find that someone else is parking on your verge, you can actually contact the city's rangers to ask them to come along and request that they move along if they don't do that. So if you have that conversation directly with the owner of the car. The other, I guess this is really a comment on our zoning of the area in relation to the density. This is about lowering the current density coding to allow for only single houses and more strategic location of higher density development. So this is really a comment in relation to the zoning of this area of Mount Hawthorn, which is R60, and I guess it's about its location and the density coding given the proximity to Glendalough train station.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct. The density of that area has been set, as the community member mentioned earlier, because of its location so close to a train station, to try and increase the density and encourage people to use public transport and create a situation where the number of cars is reduced, and the opportunities for density are clear in that area. I think reducing the density of that area is not something that has been considered as part of the city's local planning strategy, and is not something that is currently being proposed. However, managing the impact of parking in that location is something the city is very focused on doing, as is evidenced through the recent policy changes the city has in relation to parking permits, etc., and is something the city will continue to work through, and again discuss with the state government in relation to the R codes and the state policies in relation to the number of bays required.
Thank you, Director. Do any council members have any questions or comments further on this item? Okay, look, I will speak to it. I just would like to say that I would like to note the concerns that you have about construction, and I think Councillor Harley has really raised the fact that going through having a construction site next door is a difficult process, but it is something that you can maintain contact with the city to ensure that the builder is meeting all of the requirements and not overstepping the mark. If there is any damage to your home, that is something that you would need to be compensated for, and that should not happen as part of compacting of the site. But if it does, there is an course for you to take, and in discussion with the city. I would also encourage you to seek a copy of the building management plan, as you've expressed an interest in doing. In terms of the parking pressures, I note that this is an emerging area in terms of development, and that as we see more development in the Glendalough area, we are looking at having to increase some of the parking restrictions that we do have on the streets. We do note that we often get commuter parking in the area with people travelling to Glendalough train station. So as the area is developed, the city then often we will monitor traffic on the street. It will often be brought to our attention by residents also, and that is a point at which we can look at car parking restrictions. At that point, each household would receive parking permits for the street. I would like to point out that this is different to considering an application afresh, that this is an existing development with, not an existing development, it hasn't been built. This is an existing development application that has received approval back in 2015, and this is an amendment to that approval. So a lot of the issues that have caused concern are things that have already been approved as part of the original development application. So it is not looking at this afresh, but it's looking at some minor modifications to what has already been approved. So it is quite different. There is not, in terms of where council has discretion, there's not really room to deal with those sorts of issues that you have raised, and the issues that you have raised, because they are compliant with the R codes, the city is not really in a position to be able to affect change in those particular areas. So we can work with you on parking pressures, and we can certainly work with you if there are issues during construction. And in terms of the actual proposal, I am supporting the officer recommendations. So I hope that you'll maintain contact with us throughout that construction period and let us know how this impacts the parking situation. Unless there are any other further comments, Councillor Loden, do you wish to close debate? Okay, all right, I'll put it. All those in favour? I'll declare it carried. Okay. Moving on to the next item this evening is item 11.3. This is the adoption of the City of Vincent 2017-18 budget. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this item? Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Gondaszewski. Sorry, Councillor Toppelberg. Sorry.
He was worried about being confused with Susan earlier, so...
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
There's been plenty of discussion about lots of matters within here. I will not speak to most of them because it's been done to death for a lot of people, and I think it will be prudent just to move on. I will move my amendment, which is on the green, which relates to the effectively deleting the fee for people getting access to recorded information, which is a recorded copy of council meetings and briefings. So I'll move that.
Is that moved seconded by Councillor Gondaszewski? Thank you.
Thank you. For me, it's pretty simple. I understand that the process that we used to have, which was in order to get the information, was a lot more difficult. I just think it's a simple transparency measure and making us meetings more accessible to people. The information is there. Yes, there is some minimal administrative time, but I could probably sit here and list 50 things that we do administratively and don't charge a fee for. Included in the CEO's written responses to the questions on notice from last week from a member of the gallery was the fact that we are still processing alfresco licences, and we don't charge a fee for that, and I'm sure that that is a far greater administrative burden than what this would be. I just think it's simple. If we record the meetings and the information that we provide in them is publicly accessible and to the public interest, I don't see a point in having to charge for it, so I will hopefully get your support on that.
Councillor Gondaszewski.
I guess just a question through you, Mayor. In relation to the level of administrative time and effort currently covered by the imposition of the fee, just to get confirmation that that is commensurate with the current fee.
Yes, we did a standard assessment of the time it takes just to receive an application, find the relevant piece of information and provide access to that, and the value that's in the document was the value of staff time relating to retrieving and provision of a document.
Okay, thank you. Look, I'm supportive of this amendment. I think that the city, as Councillor Toppelberg has stated, we choose to impose fees, but we also potentially choose not to impose fees where we see that our resources can be directed towards an issue that we have an interest in pursuing. I think we've always been on the record around transparency and accountability, and I think this is in line with that.
Councillors? Councillor Hallett?
Thanks. I support the amendment. I guess one of the issues that was raised previously, if we got rid of the fee, was that we might get a whole bunch of kind of vexatious requests to use up administration's time. And I guess if we can wait and see if that occurs, and if it does, then I guess the alternative might be to review the way that we do the live streaming and have that those archives publicly available immediately, and then that will get rid of that staff time.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Any further comments?
Yes,
Councillor
through you,
Harley?
Chair. May I ask what, through to the Director, what format we then provide this recording into the requester?
Through the Chair, to date the format has been an audio format, and that's currently what the policy allows for.
Thank you. I know it's an audio, but do we provide a disc, or is it sent electronically? So how does what's the physical?
Yep, through the Chair, it's a USB stick.
Okay, how much does a USB stick cost?
It's about $4.
Okay. I'm not going to support the amendment. I acknowledge that there are many things that we do that we don't charge for, and I think those things should be reviewed. I acknowledge that we don't charge for alfresco, but that was part of a broad city activation plan, and I think gives a lot more back to the city than what the city spends. It is commonplace for government entities to charge for access to the information. It's not an anti-transparency measure. It's to ensure that we actually get some money back for the time that it takes. If we're providing USB sticks, there's a cost to that. I just think it's a small fee, and I think if somebody actually wants access to the information, then I don't think it's that much of an impost to pay a fee. There are fees attached to a whole range of information provision, and I do think that over time these links should just be provided on our website, but until they are, I do think the city should not be doing this for free.
Councillors, are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? I declare it carried.
Yeah, I've got nothing further, actually.
Thank you, Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. In relation to the budget, as Councillor Toppelberg said, I think we've been through this in detail. However, I have been giving some consideration in relation to a potential amendment to the budget to increase the level of funding provided to the YMCA in relation to their response to their community budget submission, and in the amount of an increase of $10,000, and I just wanted to get some advice through you, Mayor, to the Director of Corporate Services in relation to how that might work and how such an amendment may be crafted.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Any increase to the operating budget without a corresponding decrease, there are two options available to Council. One is you could simply approve the increase in expenditure, which would mean you would have a $10,000 deficit budget, or the more appropriate outcome would be to also reduce the transfers to the reserve, so you maintain a balanced budget, so a zero balanced budget on the rate setting statement. That would be the recommendation that I would make, and so in order to achieve that, we would need to have an amendment that would have a subject to under item 1. At the conclusion of item 1, that would be that subject to the following budget amendments being reflected in the appropriate statutory statement. So we would need to then flow it through each of those statutory budgets that are affected, and so it would be a relatively simple amendment in that respect to increase $10,000 and decrease the transfer to reserves by $10,000.
Thank you, Director. The CEO has a form of wording here that he's about to read out to Council for consideration.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I won't take credit for it. The Director of Corporate Services anticipated that there may be an amendment relating to Recommendation 1, so the words that he has provided, as he's just indicated, adding the following words to the end of item 1, so they would appear immediately beneath Recommendation 1.7, and they are subject to the following budget amendments being reflected in the appropriate statutory statements above, colon, and then 2 dot points appearing beneath that. The first dot point would read, increase the subsidy to be paid to the YMCA from $30,000 to $40,000 if the amount proposed is an additional $10,000, and decrease the transfer to the Tamala Park land sales reserves from $1,479,962 to $1,469,962, being a reduction of $10,000.
Councillor Gontaszewski, do you wish to move an amendment?
Yes, I wish to move the amendment as read by the CEO.
Councillor Hallett, are you seconding the amendment? We have a seconder.
Okay. Look, I think that we have seen YMCA delivering youth services from HQ in Leederville for some time. They have previously been funded, I think last year was $60,000. This year's submission, the recommended amount was to be provided was $30,000. And I understand that this may result in some reduction in service provision. I think, firstly, I would like to say that I think that I can see why the amount of $30,000 was recommended based on the submission. I don't think that it is the city's responsibility to fund ongoing costs of operation, such as management of the centre, of HQ. I think the city makes a valuable contribution through the peppercorn lease provided for the facility. And I would also note that we have limits or in our understanding of the programs that are offered at this facility and their reach and or to what level these programs are offered are actually attended by or are taken up by City of Vincent residents. That said, I think it's disappointing to think that access for young people to live performance and arts programs, or for access for young musicians within the City of Vincent to a performance space and performance and arts programs would be reduced in the coming year. I would like to propose a small increase on the amount that has been recommended by administration, and I would like to that in any funding agreement that comes from this increase would require the provision of statistics in relation to program delivery, so that we can ensure that where we are seeing programs delivered for young people, that they are reaching the young people of the City of Vincent. I think that if we can see that within the next 6 months, that we can work with YMCA and our Children and Young Persons Advisory Group to ensure that we see opportunities for young people continue. But I do recognise that there is some valuable programs being delivered, and I would like to see that these are able to continue.
Thank you, Councillor. Just before we move to the seconder, the CEO just wanted to raise there has to be a slight amendment to the amounts mentioned for the amendment.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Apologies, council members. There's a slight difference to the transfer to reserve account that I mentioned before. Wasn't the most updated figure. What appears on the screen is the actual most current and updated transfer to reserve amount. So rather than the from amount that I previously stated, which was 1,479,962, and that figure then being reduced by 10,000, the actual transfer to reserve amount would be reduced from the figure appearing on the screen, which is 1,462,514, by $10,000 down to $1,452,514. So just for the avoidance of doubt, drawing that to council members' attentions.
Thank you. Councillor Hallett, would you like to comment?
Sorry, just a point of order. Can I just ask a question then? Does recommendation 1.5 need to change then as well in terms of the transfers to reserves, because that gives the total figure?
Through the chair, no, the transfers 1.5 is correct. That figure, so the figure quoted by the CEO was incorrect as provided by myself. It was related to the value that was being reflected at the briefing session. We've since made a very minor modification. So the transfers to the reserve reflected in 1.5 is correct.
Sorry, but does it need to be reduced by $10,000 as a result of the amendment? Does that total need to be amended as well?
So through the chair, yes. So the amendment is to actually amend any of those statutory statements in accordance with the $50,000, the $10,000 in either way. So each of the statutory statements will be amended accordingly once this, assuming this is approved.
Councillor Hallett.
Thanks. Yes, I support the amendment of the addition of 10 grand to YMCA HQ. As Councillor Gonczewski has said, YMCA does provide some really important services, and they have for a long time. They're a bit of an icon within Leederville. I think it would be useful to know more about the level of service they provide to Vincent residents, but I guess also I wouldn't want to underestimate the benefit and usefulness of having a destination for young people outside of Vincent coming to the Leederville town centre, and I guess the benefit that we can have more broadly from that. I think also with the current climate, I think, you know, YMCA, they'll be disappointed that we haven't been able to provide the full amount that they've applied for, but I think being realistic about what we've got capacity to deliver, and similarly for them, the expectation that perhaps they'd find alternative funding to the scope that they wanted in a couple of years may have been a bit ambitious. So I think it's good that we can support them a little bit more. Yeah, that's it.
Any further comments on the amendment? Councillor Murphy.
Yes, I'd like to just mention or echo both Gonczewski and Hallett's comments. The YMCA is, in fact, one of Perth's only all-ages venues. In fact, I think it is the only all-ages venue for young people to be able to perform their music, so it's quite critical in a broader sense. I understand that, you know, we're unsure and no one seems to know exactly how many of our people are involved in that, and that is vital information. I understand administration's concern and confusion over exactly what we should be doing without that information, but I think until that information is available, that we should still be supporting this space as a significant youth arts and youth building facility. Just even tonight, Alex Castle from the Mount Hawthorn Hub was saying, just up the other end of Oxford Street, the problems that they're having with our ageing child population, and that's not just in Mount Hawthorn. I know that North Perth as well. So we've got an issue that we're going to have to deal with over the next decade, which is older children living in the city after an influx of young families. So I think that, cutting funding too far is probably not the greatest idea at this point, so I will be supporting the amendment.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just questions to you, to the Director of Corporate Services. There was some discussion, and leaving the proposed use of the food truck and the potential issues aside, but am I correct that the lease explicitly precludes any commercial activity on the site? Is that correct, or the sublease?
Through the Chair, yes, from recollection, there is one of the provisions is that there is no commercial activity undertaken as part of the lease.
Just as an aside, given the funding issues, the centrality of it, and potentially, but even perhaps on a benefit sharing arrangement, it may be worthwhile looking over the next 12 months at amendments to the lease to allow that to happen, such that if the right tenant was to come along, that both YMCA and the city could benefit to whatever extent both organisations were prepared to. But it seems odd that we would have the premises effectively available at some times, but not actually be able to provide them with the potential financial benefit that could provide because of the nature of the lease that's written, if it was in line with our values.
Perhaps I can respond to that, Councillor Toppelberg. I met with Brooke Draper, who's the General Manager of the Perth Metro region, as well as Andrew, who's the Manager of HQ, with Michael Quirk, our Director of Community Engagement, yesterday. And we did talk about the fact that we want them to be able to have alternative revenue streams. They're just about to launch their Y Create program, where they're having a co-working space available for young people, coupled with mentoring for young people who are trying to start up new ideas, new enterprise, and talked about the fact that running a social enterprise from HQ would actually really work in very, very well with that. So the Director for Community Engagement and myself have said we'd really like to flesh out that conversation and talk about what opportunities can present at HQ to not only give them the revenue stream and make them more financially independent and less dependent on an annual grant from the City of Vincent and potentially other funders, but also to help those young people that are coming through the door to have a space to actually be able to use and to develop business ideas in. So that is something that we discussed. The other item that we discussed is having HQ having a much greater presence with the City of Vincent through our Children and Young People Advisory Group. So we're very keen to see them put forward a nomination for the Children and Young People Advisory Group in October, and so that we can actually start to potentially get groups from within our community that have got really great ideas about how they might like to have some impact in that space, and bring them together and actually see that we're getting HQ to provide some really great services to the young people within the City of Vincent. So I do think that we're heading in the right direction. I think that HQ have got some really great ideas, and I think that you just see when you go there that they are trying to do something different and create some revenue streams. So I think we're heading in the direction, and I do support this amendment because I think that, as with all community organisations, it does take time to get other income streams on board, and that a 50% reduction in one fell swoop could be seen to be a little harsh. So I fully support this amendment. Are there any further comments on this item? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Councillor Gonchevsky, back to you.
I believe there is another amendment in relation to the adoption of the budget that I'm happy to put.
That would be fantastic, thank you. Do you have a seconder? Oh, and you're speaking to the amendment on the yellow?
Yes, sorry, the amendment on the yellow for in the room.
Is there a seconder for the amendment on the yellow? Councillor Murphy.
Just for the benefit of the room, the amendment on the yellow relates to the amending the Section 1 in relation to the budget, Section 1.7, adding in an additional 1.7.1 so that the capital works program showing a total of 13,411,320,000, including 2016-2017 carry forward projects as detailed in attachment 3, 3.1, 3.8, subject to any budget savings at the conclusion of each of the following projects being reallocated to the Early Birds Playgroup Centre upgrade project, Early Birds Playgroup Centre mandatory building compliance upgrade, Early Birds Playgroup Centre replace ceilings, and Early Birds Playgroup Centre switchboard renewal. We had commentary in relation to this last week, and I understand that there has been some discussion in relation to progressing with these. The Centre Management Committee is very proactive, and yes, I'm happy to support this amendment.
Councillor Murphy, do you have any comment?
Just to say that I also support this amendment. I think it's great sense. Any savings that can be made can be used in other areas to improve the playgroup. Sounds like that they could do with every dollar and cent possible. So, yeah, I'll be supportive of the amendment.
Perhaps if I could just talk to it, just to flesh it out a little more. Basically what this amendment is seeking to do is that the Early Birds Playgroup under the draft budget are being allocated certain amounts for certain work. So some of that is mandatory building compliance work, and some of it is discretionary building work to actually improve the look and feel of the Early Birds Playgroup Centre. So what this amendment is seeking to do is where they have mandatory work to do, such as upgrade the switchboard, do the mandatory building upgrades, and replace half of their ceiling. If those items come in under the cost of the allocation, then that budget allocation can then move to their discretionary building works. So I know that Early Birds Playgroup has been sourcing quotations and feel confident that they can do some of this work at a more competitive price, and that it simply allows them to have a global figure of $33,000, provided that they satisfy those mandatory building upgrades that the city needs them to do, and leaving the remainder for them to refurbish and renew what is actually, after 2 site visits, looking a little tired and needing a freshen up. And the reason that I am supporting Early Birds Playgroup in this endeavour is that I do believe that every now and then a management committee will come along to a community group that is filled with passion and commitment and can-do attitude, and I think that the time is now for Early Birds, in that there is a bit of a tour de force of a management committee that really wants to make improvements to the building, and I see that they have really tried hard with their marketing, their web presence, in terms of trying to engage new parents to join the centre, and the feedback that they are getting is that because it's tired and a bit dark, it's not an attractive place for those new parents to join. So not only will this help them in their endeavour to build the membership of the playgroup, but I think that as a city's asset, it will basically go towards renewal of that building. So there's from my perspective, there's a benefit to the city as well as to Early Birds Playgroup. Are there any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Thank you. Are there any further amendments or comments? Councillor Murphy.
Yes, I just have a small amendment. It's essentially the abolishment of busking fees for public entertainers. essentially not seeking to change the process in any way. So,
Councillor Murphy, I'll just see if you have a seconder. Councillor Toppelberg, thank you. Continue, Councillor Murphy.
So essentially, it looks like the town's made very little money from busking fees anyway over the last couple of years. I think maybe $200. And I just think that if we abolish the fees and charges for this, that we may encourage some more buskers in our town centres and our city under our priority thriving and creative town centres. The process will still be that buskers will need to register, and I believe that it may be able to do that on our website as of now. I'm not
Is that a question, Councillor Murphy?
Yes.
Would that be Director of Development Services? Thank you.
Through the Mayor, it was, following our discussion in the last couple of weeks, we did investigate whether it could be included into the alfresco online permit system. But given that buskers may both apply for the same location, we wanted to make sure that we iron those issues out first. So it's not proposed to be undertaken as part of the first stage, but certainly will be considered for subsequent stages. The assessment process is very simple, provided all the information is submitted with the application in accordance with the local law. It's really just a matter of whether anyone else has that space or not. So at this stage, it's not proposed to go online at the same time as the alfresco permits.
Okay, so hopefully in the future it'll be a simple online registration, so not so very little administrative cost. So I think this would be a good use of council's time. So.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Toppelberg, do you have any comments? Does anyone wish to comment further on the amendment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those.
Sorry, I've just got one question
Yes,
in regards
Councillor
to the enrolment. So at the moment, they can't do it online, but we're moving towards having them online in the same way that the food vans and that are able to go and check out the places that they're able to go to, so that we don't have lots of people turning up at the same time. Is that that's the proposal? Do you know how long it's going to be before that does come online?
Director.
Through the Mayor, the first stage is likely to go online in the next few months. All the work is now completed, and it's just a matter of actually building it and putting it onto the website, getting it all signed off. The second stage will probably occur at the same time as the local law is reviewed. I note that the broad review of the local laws included in the resolution that a report will be presented back in September for Council to consider a review of the local law in which the busking permits is a factor. So following the finalisation of that local law, we would, while we were waiting for the state government to adopt the local law and gazette the local law, we will be working on the online system. So it's hard to give an estimate because we haven't actually mapped all that out, but I would say 12 months.
And can I just get an understanding of, so we've really only been there's only been a few $100s worth of applications, so not a busking city yet, and how much staff time, there's still hope, Jim, isn't there? How much staff time is involved with processing the licence fees?
Through the Mayor, currently we haven't undertaken an assessment. We haven't had a busking application for the last 12 months, so we haven't undertaken an assessment of that. But as I said, provided all of the information is submitted with the application, it is simply a matter of confirming that all the information there addresses all the issues, so ticking the boxes to make sure it's all there and making sure no one else has a busking permit for that location. Now, given we haven't received any, it should be pretty straightforward at this stage, unless it becomes something that it's just a matter of making sure no one else has got a busking permit. So it's really quite simple. So there's not significant time, wouldn't be more than an hour, I would suggest.
Any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Councillors, are there any comments in relation to the budget? We're back to the substantive motion. Councillor Loden.
Given this is probably the biggest decision that Council makes in the year, I thought it worthy to make some comments on the budget. I'm actually really proud of the budget we've delivered. There's been a hell of a lot of work from Council, and I dread to think about how much work administration has done in pulling this all together. Despite a decreasing revenue environment from external sources, we're still able to deliver a budget that makes us one of the lowest in the inner metro area. For me personally, two things I'm particularly proud of are the efforts around waste management and public open space. One initiative there's three initiatives I wanted to talk to around the waste side of things. The first one is that we're offering a $40 cashback for residents who go from a 240 litre rubbish bin to a 140 litre rubbish bin, which for those residents who are concerned about the cost increases in their rates will in most cases make it a cost that make it their rates effectively the same as they were the previous year by achieving that cash back. We did have discussions about including a separate waste levy, which we weren't able to have the required information to make that decision this time round, but are planning to do that in the 2018-19 budget. The importance of this is that our waste is managed at by the Mindarie Regional Council, and from a state government point of view, they are progressively increasing the cost of waste management to encourage councils to divert their waste. So we will continue to see pressure on our council budget increasing because of managing our waste. It represents about 1/3 of the rates that residents pay. So this cashback initiative is a great way to incentivise people to reduce the amount of waste they produce. In addition, we're developing a waste strategy which will be delivered over the course of this year and is another budget provision. We have funded a community budget submission, or are about to fund a community budget submission put in by Transition Town Vincent to develop a composting hub in the top north-western corner of Britannia Reserve. And this is an initiative that was put forward through the city's environmental advisory group and got a great deal of support. It's giving local residents who don't wish to have a composting bin or a worm farm in their backyard a mechanism to get rid of their organics waste to further decrease their to divert further waste away from their rubbish bin. In addition, we continue to subsidise worm farms and compost bins. And so all of these things culminate in giving residents practical ways to reduce their waste and therefore also reduce their costs as well. The second thing I wanted to talk to was public open space. The three key things there are firstly the Lawless Street sump, which was identified through a workshop by the Environmental Advisory Group last year to basically turn a sump, which is a great big hole in the ground and an eyesore, into a new public open space. This is an extremely cost-effective way for the city to create new public open space in the North Perth area in a location that doesn't have a great deal of public open space as well. So that was a great little step that the EAG and administration worked on together, and then this came through as a budget proposal. We've also got the Hyde Street Park proposal as well in here, which was an idea floated a number of years ago but has recently been resurrected. And I really wanted to commend administration to their responsiveness on this. They, in a very short period of time, turned around a proposal to develop this so it could be included as part of this budget, which is a great result. And then finally, the development of the North Perth public open space, which is another item on this agenda we're discussing tonight, and the Axford Park development as well. These initiatives are things that are creating improved or new or improved public open spaces in our town centres. We have been doing this in our other town centres as well, so it's appropriate that we are expanding that to the North Perth Town Centre and also the Mount Hawthorn Town Centre. These are the locations where people spend their time, so it's important that we have good, high quality assets for people to use in these spaces. So given the current economic environment that we're dealing with, the decreased revenue, we've still been able to deliver significant programs to our community that are going to help them with their cost of living potentially, and also to provide those public open spaces in their local community as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. I'll also make some comments because I share your passion and excitement for this budget, which is something that Council has been working away on since February. And I think that it is definitely needs to be noted that these are tougher economic times and that this budget does have quite a responsible budgeting focus, but it doesn't mean that it's boring. I think that we've really managed to strike that balance between being financially responsible, as has been mentioned. Despite a modest rate increase, we will continue to be one of the lowest rating councils in the Perth metropolitan area. Our fees and charges overall are very remaining low. I did ask the very obliging Director of Corporate Services to go through the fees and charges line by line, and he told me that out of 420 lines of fees, with some of our restructured fees put to one side, there was increases in only 164 of those, and those that were not considered as part of that are parks and sports grounds, where we're either seeing a reduction in things like the charges that we will be asking our community pay to hire our halls. Sporting fees are staying the same, and in October we'll be looking at further reducing those fees. So fees and charges is a really good news story for the City of Vincent, in that they're either potentially mostly frozen or less, and our rate increase will continue to be extremely competitive despite the fact that we have tried to have corrective measures with our minimum rate. I think the other aspect I just really want to highlight is that the budget has a real focus on a strong and sustainable future, and also on having a more connected Vincent community. Some of the initiatives that I'd like to point to, as Councillor Loden has mentioned, we're having a really big push on our parks and open spaces, and that's because our community is growing, and it's really important that when we look at what initiatives we prioritise, we look to the future. And because we do have a growing population, it's very important that we don't stand still on public open space, that we do move forward. And part of that is planning. We will be doing a public open space strategy this financial year, but we will see action on the ground. As Councillor Loden has said, we're turning a huge hole in the ground with a fence around it into a lovely local park, which is on Lawler Street in North Perth. We have our first Roads to Parks demonstration project at Hyde Street Reserve. We're effectively doubling the size of that small neighbourhood park. And really exciting is that we're starting to move forward with the new North Perth Town Square, or whatever the working title shall be, to be determined later this evening. In addition to that, we will continue with our signature programs, with our greening, with our Adopt a Verge program. We'll be doing some really good eco-zoning at some of our local parks and upgrading some of our little parks, like the one that we affectionately call the Giveaway Park on Anzac Road and Scarborough Beach Road. We're also really focused on having better connections between our neighbourhoods, and that might be through our seniors program, or it might be through better pedestrian crossings. So we know that as we grow and as social isolation increases, that we need to make sure that we can walk to our neighbourhoods and that we can meet together as seniors, as youths, as groups of interested people coming together in our community. I'm also really excited about the new cashback initiative that Councillor Loden has raised, that it's as simple as, if you want to take on your own Warwick waste at home, we're rising to the challenge and we're saying we will give you $40 if you have the motivation to actually try to use a smaller bin for your waste. And providing things like the compost hub, our worm farms, etc., really provides people the opportunity to do that. I think that at the City of Vincent we have 3 tiers of service. We have our baseline service, where we need to remove your rubbish, resurface our roads, make sure the footpaths aren't cracked. Then we have our Vincent level of service, which is things like our greening plan, supporting creative arts, events and festivals, and building community partnerships. And then I think that the icing on the cake in terms of this budget is really looking at forward-thinking ideas around open space and community connection. So I'd also just like to point out that we are still on our transparency and reform journey, and that a lot of the other probably issues that might not at first seem very sparkly and exciting but are extremely important to the future of Vincent are things like having really sharp eye on our asset management, which is something that hasn't been a strength of Vincent in the past, and it is a money-hungry aspect of the work that we do, if you consider Beatty Park Leisure Centre alone. And I think that this council is really grappling with those significant and difficult issues from the past and bringing them out and tackling them head-on. We're also really keen to see a better customer service and experience at the City of Vincent, and I think that we're starting to see that through the redevelopment of our website. We're wanting to have a more follow-up on our customer requests and manage those better, and we're ultimately wanting to move to online system for development applications in terms of lodging those. So there's always more to be done, but I do believe that the city is heading in the right direction, and I think that this budget really strikes a balance between responsible financial management and priorities for the future. Thank you for listening to my speech. Are there any further comments? Councillor Hallett.
I guess just to reiterate, I mean, no matter what strategic visions and things organisations have, the budget ultimately is the document that lays out really clearly what the priorities are and the vision that a organisation has for their community. And so I think we should be really proud of the initiatives that we've been able to compile together.
Councillor Toppelberg. Oh, would anyone like to speak that hasn't spoken? Okay, Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I wasn't going to say anything, but I stewed on it, and so I'm going to. So, very quickly, I'm going to talk about rates, and I'm going to talk about minimum rates. So, we did only have one submission in relation to rate setting, but I did engage with that person vigorously via email a few times, and they've written to a number of publications, both local and statewide, and I just wanted to talk about what I feel that people get from Vincent for their minimum rates. And so I think it's a really clear point. We had a conversation 3 years ago about the fact that we've been underrating at Vincent. We haven't seen everybody's final submission, but I think if you take those that have separate waste charges and those that have them combined, we were second by a few dollars only to the City of Perth, which obviously has a much higher density and much in their mileage have a higher number of rateable properties, and obviously a significant revenue stream that we don't have access to through things such as their car parking arrangements. But we are the second lowest rating inner city council in a metropolitan council in Western Australia, and have been for many, many years. And this year, as far as I'm aware, that is going to continue, second or third. That is on the back of a minimum rate increase of some 23% 3 years ago, 10.5% 2 years ago, and a proposed 9.7% increase this year. So I absolutely sympathise with people who look at percentage increases on the year before and look at that and see that as a burden. But the fact that in round numbers we're talking $21 a week at our minimum rate to be able to get the services that we offer collectively as a community, and to still be one of the lowest rating, having had those increases, I think is an affirmation that we were right, that we were underrating, and also that we're on the right path, and I'm sure that will taper off significantly in the coming years. I think we're reaching a level where it is about fair, and that's something it's always 12 months in advance before you can actually prove that, but I think it's important to note that that's where we feel that we're getting to that right point. But absolutely I think the fact that we still sit very much at the top of that table or the bottom of it, depending which way you look at it, in terms of being among the lowest rating councils in the metro area, having had significant increases in our minimum rate, highlights some of the inefficiencies that we had in terms of how we rated, but also the efforts that this council has gone to protect and to still offer extraordinary benefit to people who own or occupy the lowest rateable properties in the city. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that.
Thank you. That's closed debate, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour of adopting the budget, I declare it carried. Thank you. We're now moving on to item 13.2, community budget submissions. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Hallett.
sorry, just in light of what we've been through, I think that we still have some work to do in terms of how we promote the change in how we fund some of these activities. And I think that we had a conversation before about the great work that the YMCA do, and they were obviously actively encouraged because of their existing relationship with the city to access funding via this. I think it's a far better system than we had previously, and it works very well. But I do think we only know what we know, so we only know what we see in the submissions or what our existing network is. But this is for me, it's having had the privilege of being at the workshops and through that process, the internal side, I think it's a really great way of getting to know our community, what their needs are, understand it, and also it does help also in the forward planning. I don't think there's anything on the submissions that was rejected out of hand other than people just wanting us to cut their rates for them personally. But I think that everything that wasn't given a budget allocation was certainly looked at in the future years or integrated somehow into our planning framework, and I think that's a great demonstration of our responsiveness as a council. And I also appreciate that the CEO has recognised the level of what's required, what's being asked of the community, whether they be individuals or groups in making these submissions, and also the importance to council and therefore taking it under his wing to actually ensure that the responses deal with that appropriately with the appropriate level of respect and encouragement. So that was a subtle hint also in that last statement. But yeah, it's been a good process, and obviously I'm sure that it will grow over time, and there is no bottomless pit, and I think that we will have to work on how we promote it and also putting some reasonable limitations or couching around what we can reasonably deal with.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett.
Thanks. I guess I want to start by acknowledging what a great process the community budget submissions is, that not every local government has it, and I think it's one of the hallmarks of Vincent and the other councillors that do it in going out to the community to look at the folks that are on the ground and probably know their neighbourhoods and the local needs far better than any of us, and an opportunity for them to put that in writing and be properly considered as they are. I guess also the number of submissions we received, which was again an increase on last year, also shows the level of engagement that the Vincent community has in deciding what their local community will look like and engaging with the council, and I think that that's really a wonderful thing. I guess in terms of the decisions that we've had to make around those submissions, it's a little bittersweet. So there's some great standout initiatives that I'm very excited that we're supporting. So Transition Town Vincent has already been mentioned, Befriend, etc. But there's also some other worthwhile ideas that we haven't or have only in part supported or are in the out years. And those decisions haven't been made lightly, and we've had significant conversations about what will finally end up in the budget, and some of that has been quite difficult. I do want to thank everyone who took the time to put in budget submissions. It's important that we have an active community taking an interest in what we do over the following year. For those who might be disappointed in the outcome of their submission, I encourage you to consider it in the context of the many other budget decisions that we have made, and certainly not be disheartened about participating in the next community budget submission process, as well as exploring opportunities through Vincent Community Grant programs and the other advice that's been given from administration.
Thank you, Councillor Loden.
Just from an administrative point of view, the CEO has provided an amendment to item 13.2 in noting the change of the funding of the YMCA. So I'd like to move an amendment of item 11.3 that councillors have this in their email. If they want to have a read themselves, that council add the following words to the recommendation or end of recommendation 1, noting that through its adoption of the 2017-18 annual budget, council has approved an additional allocation of $10,000 to the YMCA in respect of community budget submission item 2.7.
Councillor Toppelberg, are you seconding? Thank you. Any further comment or debate on this item? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour of the amendment? I declare it carried. Councillor Loden, do you have any further comments? Does anyone have any comments to make on the community budget submissions? Councillor Buckles.
I just want to make one comment, and I don't mean to be negative, and I won't name particular names, but I just guess the community budget submissions are keenly sought, and there's a lot of people put in applications, and there's a very limited amount of money in there, and I just for mine, and I didn't move anything at budget because ultimately I think those things are supportable at a council level of things that we would like to see happen within our community, but they weren't necessarily items that I feel fit the bill of what is a community budget submission versus something that I feel that, you know, an administration may feel or a council may feel is a good thing to do and may adopt. So I think, you know, my reflection on the process would be that council may wish to consider making sure that it's, you know, these are, to me, the community budget submissions are of the Vincent community with requests rather than external agencies seeing an opportunity to fund things that they may normally do or council may normally do as business. In next, I think, you know, they could easily be fit in within a budget as move around, but I think that, you know, someone very local putting in a local submission could well read this and feel, oh, well, how was I meant to stand up against X, Y, or Z? Because that's a, you know, a broader organisation with quite well-defined things that they do, and aren't there other processes for those sort of programs to exist at local government level? But that's it. But other than that, look, I'm really happy to support the community budget submissions, and obviously we've already adopted the budget, which I'm very happy with.
Any further comments? Okay, look, I'd just like to reiterate that I would like to thank all of those community members that did put in their community budget submission process. It's the second year that the City of Vincent has run this process, and it seems to be becoming one of the signature things that we do. We received 55 submissions, and within those submissions there were 64 different proposals, so that was an increase on the number that we received last financial year, and almost half of the submissions we received have been supported by council or recommended, because we're about to vote, and included in this year's budget to the value of $400,000, which is quite a sizable amount when you consider things like Robin Hood projects in other councils and allocation towards those sorts of submissions. And there's an additional $450,000 worth of suggestions which have been earmarked for consideration in future budget years. So I think it's been a really important way to involve the community and to provide an outlet for the community to put forward the ways in which they want to see improvements in the place where they live, work and connect. And I see this as a really fantastic way of inviting that involvement from the community and hearing other ideas, because we certainly don't have all of the ideas. We certainly want to facilitate good ideas as well as perhaps raise the odd good idea from time to time. So it's really exciting to have that body of work come through from the community. So are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the community budget submissions item. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Okay, we're now moving on to item 9.1. So we're going back to development services now, and that is number 395 Bulwer Street, West Perth. This is a Section 31 State Administrative Tribunal reconsideration for a proposed 4 multiple dwellings. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've spoken at length I spoke to the CEO. I did actually speak to the applicant's representative today in response to his phone call. I've got a number of issues with his application. I'm well aware that it's sitting in SAT. I'm well aware of where it's at. I'm aware of what's built next door. I'm aware that it was recommended for approval when it first came to the city. But I actually think that and I'm also well aware that the grounds for refusal, given the nature of the report and the way it's been written, would require extraordinary planning argument to be able to defend them. But there are some things that I largely don't understand. I don't understand why when we go through a SAT mediation process on an item that the mediated outcome that we are seeking is only able to be recommended by conditions of approval rather than actually being a mediated outcome. This was not ready to come back to us, in my opinion. Effectively, it was the same proposal with a squashed roof and some slightly larger internal courtyards. Those internal courtyards, given the nature of the boundary walls, certainly to the property to the east, make very little difference to the concerns that I had. I did mention, this is an R60 zoning at the top end of Bulwer Street, not far from the Vincent Street intersection. It's just down the road from the pub. If we're talking, not far from gone blank now. Soccer pitch. What's it called? Dorian Gardens. Thank you very much. My apologies. So yeah, look, it's somewhere, and I did mention to the consultant today that had this conversation happen 6-12 months earlier, it's an area that probably would have been able to, within the site, to get the same yield, would have been able to potentially absorb another storey, but at more open space, whether within the roof space or otherwise. But the idea that they address bulk and scale at SAT by just saying, well, we'll squash the roof down, I just find that bizarre. And our response then effectively is to say, well, we still don't like it, it's basically the same building, but we'll put in all these conditions that make it look different because our DAC said that might work, and we'll hope the applicant accepts them. I don't, that's not how I identify with the SAT process. I'm disappointed that it has come back to us at this point. The idea that the materials in the that are proposed are reflecting, with respect to say that it's reflecting, I can't remember the terminology that Aaron used, but to say that it's utilising materials that are found in the area because it has white render and red brick. Well, that's just, it's just not, that's not design. That is just literally putting some red brick and some white render onto a building. So one of the things that perplexes me is that the front setback assessment, and again, as I said, it would take an extraordinary planning argument now considering the way the report has been written, and our staff have twice recommended approval for it. But I do not understand how the definition of that, what was presented as a 1 metre deep or 1 metre high extrusion that is only 900 millimetres from the footpath in the upper level, is not considered the setback of the upper storey. It's basically a complete roof over the entire north-facing ground floor units. The argument is that because the R codes mention the word weather protection, that it therefore provides some benefit, but to me it is almost completely encases the ground floor. Should we or the ground floor courtyards, should we be of a mind to actually ensure that the landscaping conditions are adhered to and we get those trees across the front, effectively the entire ground floor courtyards to Unit 1 and 2 will be boxed in because they'll have trees along the northern frontage. This, mind you, they also have 4 rubbish bins, 2 in each corner, because the bin stores for upstairs are actually right adjacent to their courtyard downstairs, and their own are internal. It's a poorly designed building. It's a horrendous outcome for the street. It is mildly made better by the conditions that are there. I don't normally make architectural comment, but the reliance on what is next door, which was ultimately something that was part of the triggers that drove us to actually change our planning policies to prevent these things happening. The idea that that's the emerging streetscape within this area is just completely wrong. I'm not going to talk about the issue of the car bay. I think that argument has been made, but I find it gut-wrenching that we don't have a framework that allows us to point very specifically to reasons why this should be refused. I'm never done it before, but I may even consider having to get up and leave the room so I don't vote for it, but I'm struggling to find reasons to vote in favour for it. I think it is a really bad outcome, and I understand the process that's been gone through and that the applicant has received recommendations for approval, and I understand from their point of view that the idea of going back to the drawing board would be at odds with them, but it's just not a great development, and I think the outcome is poor for the street, the city, the future occupants, and for the developer. As I said to the consultant today, another $20,000 spent on architecture probably would have yielded 3 or 4 times that per dwelling in return to be able to get a better outcome for the same build cost. But as I say, we have what we have before us, and I'll listen to the debate with interest.
Councillor Buckles.
Look, I agree with an awful lot of what Councillor Toppelberg has said. I must admit, I don't think it looks too terrible from the street, but that's, maybe I'm just an architectural nuffy. It could well be true. But it's a bit beige for me. But I actually don't think making it a single roof improves it. I actually think that, as presented with the 2 peaks, is less of an impact than the larger. But I won't. I will accept the advice of the administration on pushing for that recommendation. But to me, the impact on the street aren't my more significant concerns with it. It's significant lot coverage, tiny courtyards, and just general, excessive supply of built form on a very small site. However, I am going to support the officer recommendation. because I think that I think it presents it as an approvable application that I don't think we'd be able to argue elsewhere otherwise.
Councillors?
Ask a question, just
sure.
I'll ask it now, sorry to interrupt, but just for clarity, we received an email from the Manager of Approval Services last week which highlighted, I'm just presenting it there, which actually was the city's drawing of what the applicant will have to build according to our conditions. Just to confirm with you, so let's call it the extrusion or the balcony or the giant planter box, so it'll sit 900 mil back from the street, it's 300 mil deep. The hashed section there, is that just going to be planter box, or is that actually a balustrading at the front, or is the balustrading set back a metre because we've limited the size of the planter boxes to a metre so that they can be serviced, watered or otherwise? That hashed section there, does that just disappear? Where is the balustrading actually proposed to be? Is it going to be behind the planter box at the edge at the street front, or is it actually not required because the planter box is far enough back?
Through the Mayor, the balustrading will be where the hashed section is, so at the street frontage. Mind you, it'll all come down to the applicant's and the DAC's view and the city's view on the design outcome that's achieved, because there's a number of conditions there that are recommended to change the design outcome for the streetscape. So there is flexibility in that condition for it to be moved elsewhere if that outcome is better. But at this stage, I consider it would be where the hashed is shown.
Can I just a further question then, it's to do with process. Given that there's still issues that need to be resolved even in meeting the conditions, can I just ask in terms of process, how does it come back for reconsideration? It's obviously a SAT order that it goes for reconsideration. Does the SAT member view the proposed changes, because obviously where the applicant got to and the city got to in terms of what would be acceptable was divergent at that point, whose decision is it that it's ready for reconsideration, and on what basis can we be certain, despite even the applicant's acceptance of it, that the SAT member will be satisfied that this was as a result of mediation? I'm just curious as to how we actually get it to come back without plans by the applicant for what they want to build.
Through the Mayor, just in relation to the background of this, the SAT set down the orders for reconsideration. They hadn't seen any revised proposal. They hadn't seen or even heard what was going to be changed by the applicant. They just simply gave the applicant an opportunity to present revised plans, and they invited the council to reconsider those revised plans. The applicant provided revised plans, and the city wasn't comfortable and requested an extension and new orders. The SAT issued new orders to give the applicant more time. The applicant came back with revised plans a second time, and at that point wasn't willing to extend or agree to revised orders that would give us an opportunity to continue mediating on the outcome, but simply invited the council to consider it tonight. In relation to what happens from here, if the application is approved with these conditions, the applicant will have the opportunity to continue the appeal or withdraw. From what the applicant's indicated, it's likely they'll withdraw the appeal, and SAT will have no further involvement. It'll just be between the city and the applicant to negotiate the outcome. The city will certainly be referring the revised plans the applicant sends through to the DAC members who provided these comments, and work with the DAC and the applicant to come up with a proposal that addresses the concerns that the city's raised in the report.
Councillor Gondaszewski.
I understand that there's also an issue with parking in relation to this, and I know the arguments that have been put forward from in the administration response in relation to the lack of the visitor car bay. I just have a question through you, Mayor, to the Director of Development Services and also the Community Engagement in relation to our parking permit policy, in terms of the policy around multi-residential dwellings and parking permits, and also, I guess, the rationale for potentially limiting those permits or not issue, those permits for certain multi-residential dwellings.
Through the Mayor, this development certainly won't be, the residents certainly won't be permitted to have residential parking permits. The justification around the development's shortfall in visitor parking is that the crossover will be removed and an additional on-street parking bay will be created as a result. That's part of the conditions that have been recommended. So as a result, visitors will be able to park in the additional bay that's provided, and essentially that complies with the R Code's requirements. Obviously, those visitors won't be able to park there for longer than the time restrictions that the city has in place, as there will be no visitor or residential parking permits provided.
I guess just a comment that from my understanding, I guess when we've talked about dwellings that don't qualify for permits under our policy, the rationale has at least in part been that these dwellings are required to provide a level of parking on site, and that's why they're not issued with resident parking for either residents or visitors. And so I think if we're going to have that policy in place and we're going to approve developments in areas that have parking restrictions, it seems as though we have this two-tier system where we essentially say that parking restrictions, where we have them in place on residential streets, shouldn't actually impact or have a significant impact on the residents of those streets, that they should be able to have visitors for extended periods of time. They should be able to have a carer visit their home and stay for the entire day. And that person shouldn't have to do that either via public transport or bicycle or on foot or move their car every 2 hours. That we offer our residents a level of amenity and convenience, and that essentially our parking restrictions are in place to look at, providing addressing different strategies to deter all-day commuter parking, to ensure parking churn, etc. So I understand that in this development that there is a parking bay that's provided on the street as a result of this development. That parking bay is not for the sole use of the visitors or the residents of the development. And I think, Councillor Toppelberg talked about the livability, and I think that, we have to be considerate of the livability of the developments that we're approving. And as much as, it was raised earlier tonight that there may be some limitations to the requirements themselves. I think that we really do need to be careful that we're not putting a two-tier system in place, and that we're not having we're not approving developments that are deficient in parking. That said, I recognise, as Councillor Toppelberg said, I recognise where we're at. I recognise that there is conditioned in this circumstance to create an additional on-street bay. But I hope that in future we can be considerate of these policies or our planning policies that exist in addition to our parking policies, and ensure that we're not actually setting ourselves up to put one in jeopardy as a result of the other. So I guess I just wanted to make my views known on that subject.
Any further comments? Look, I'll also comment. Look, I am a bit of a stickler for providing the required car bays for new developments. As we've seen tonight, we have residents coming to council meetings regularly to complain about the impact of parking of developments. We regularly have questions about the minimum parking requirements in place under the R codes. And I also think that when you're unable to provide a visitors bay which is required, it means that you are overdeveloping the site. So I know that we have gone through this process, and in some ways when you look at the items that require discretion of council, it may not seem that council has a lot to hang its hat on, but I do believe that parking is an essential requirement to be provided by a development, and particularly, as you've raised, Councillor Gontaszewski, this development, the residents that eventually move into these units will not be eligible for parking permits. So it is, for me, a significant issue that visitor parking has not been provided. The other issues around the setbacks and the boundary wall, again, while they may seem minor, where you are reducing setbacks, you are adding to the bulk and scale of the development. So I would just like to go to the Director of Development Services and say, given the concerns raised by councillors this evening on this development, can you please provide some advice to us on chances of securing a better outcome through continuing with mediation or refusal of the application?
Through the Mayor, the matter is before SAT. The City has been working with the applicant for a number of months to try and deliver an improved outcome. As a result of that, this is the revised proposal put forward by the applicant. I can't comment on whether the applicant would seek to go to a full hearing or would seek to mediate further to try and come up with a proposal that address the concerns that councillors raised tonight. The chances of success in SAT, again, I can't comment other than to say there are two areas of discretion. One relates to the side setbacks and the other relates to the visitor parking bay. So they're the two areas of discretion that remain. All the other areas of discretion the applicant has removed as part of the revised plans from the previous proposal. So it really just relates to the side setbacks and the visitor parking. And if the matter goes to a full hearing, then they'll likely be the matters that are discussed and the SAT will determine the proposal on.
Through you, Chair. So just following on from that, it's in the category of other developments we've seen where, sorry, we can't comply, otherwise we won't be able to add an extra story or an extra unit, etc. And it's and yield, to be frank, is not necessarily our main consideration in this. But I am concerned long-term parking is looming, what's already looming as one of the significant pressure points as an inner city council. So I am concerned that parking is not being provided for, and I understand it's because they are unlikely to be able to put 4 units in. But to be honest, I don't feel that that's our problem. I think that that's up to the developer to look at a piece of land, to look at what they can build, to look at what they do need to comply with. There's very little. I think the green stuff is there just. Well, I'm really not sure what it's there for, and I'm not sure how that's going to comply in any way. It looks completely overbuilt. It looks too much for this site. And what I would like to know through the director is what your view is about if this is rejected and it goes back to SAT, and if we have a requirement for visitor parking, then what weight is SAT likely to give to that, or are they going to be a rubber stamp in regards to that?
Through the Mayor, I just want to note that the application was lodged in February 2016, so before the built form policy came into place. In relation to the visitor parking, the SAT will consider the city's arguments around the need for the site to provide visitor parking, the issues with parking in the locality, the availability of parking on the street, not only the current availability but the future availability based on the redevelopment of that area. I can't comment on what the SAT would decide other than to say that would be the basis for the city's argument, and the parking permits and the parking restrictions would all be part of that as well.
I'd just like to ask a question to the Director of Development Services. Other than refusal, is there the option of conditioning the visitor parking bay, or would that be seen to be such a significant change to the development that it would not, it could not be considered to be a fair and reasonable condition?
Yes, through the Mayor. Given the configuration of the development, there is no opportunity for visitor parking to be provided without a complete redesign of the development and reconfiguration of the development. So yes, it would be a significant change, and it wouldn't be a valid condition in my view.
Any further questions or comments on this? Okay. Councillor Toppelberg, you wish to comment?
Yeah, I will speak further, just to say that my disappointment, and I understand this application's been with us long before the built form policy, but I do feel for the applicant in the sense that they, as I said, they have gone through a process, they've received a recommendation for approval, it's been refused by council, they've gone to mediation, and as was highlighted to me today, some of the issues that perhaps seemed to be shared by council weren't put across in a manner which was clear during that mediation process. So my disappointment, I guess, is partly in our processes and our policies, that we didn't have and don't have a suite of policies that as soon as someone walks in with someone that presents as this, that we can just say, no, that doesn't stand a chance because of A, B, C. The fact that it gets to this, I think, is a disappointment for me. And I also, if you look, both of the planning consultants that have dealt with this application over that period of time have had extensive workings within the city, and I think that they've relied extremely heavily on the approval of the property next door. I don't think anyone could sit and say that this is in line with the vision that's been espoused from this chamber for many years already in terms of what we'd like to see in terms of design outcomes. And I think that that development next door was approved ultimately via council through a reconsideration through the SAT, because we felt largely the same. And so my disappointment, probably more so, is with the fact that we haven't been able to articulate our policies as such that we do have reasonable grounds in which to make this go away. So, yeah, I'll nothing further. Thank you.
That's closed debate, so I'll put the item. All those in favour of supporting the recommended motion? All those against? Can I have a show of hands against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I declare it lost. Do we require an alternative motion?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I'd invite the Director of Development Services to advise Council if he has any opinion on it. But in my view, Mayor Cole, in the absence of a decision, the default is not the alternative of what's been presented. Council would need to adopt something other than what was recommended if it wishes to do that.
Through the Mayor, as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 areas of discretion that Council is considering. Both of those areas of discretion were the reasons were included in the reasons for refusal in December. So I'll try and pull up the decision from December and simply construct a recommendation around that.
Councillors, I'm just going to seek a resolution that we come back to item 9.1 so that we can move through other council business, given that this is going to take a bit of time for the Director of Development Services. So I have a mover that we return to item 9.1 at the point at which we have advice from the Director for Development Services. Move Councillor Buckles, seconded Councillor Harley. All those in favour? Declare it carried. So what we'll do now is we'll move on to item 9.5, which is number 4, 280 Lord Street, Perth, a change of use from eating house to consulting rooms medical. Do I have a mover? Councillor Toppelberg, seconder. Councillor Hallett. Councillor Toppelberg, do you have anything to any comments? Councillor Hallett, any comments?
Just that the spaces in that location have been empty for some time, so regardless of whether they're eating houses or consulting rooms, I think it's important that the space is used for something. Increasing access to health and remedial services fits entirely with a mixed-use development, and I hope it's a trigger for more services and small businesses in the area.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Are there any further comments in relation to this item? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. All right, council members, we're now moving on to item 9.2, which is the North Perth Town Centre Public Open Space. Do I have a mover for this item?
Sorry, just a point of order. Can we maybe do 9.6, because I did raise it and there's people in the gallery who were hoping it had gone through on block, so I do apologise.
Oh, sorry, yes. Of course, if we have people waiting in the gallery, I'm more than happy to move the way in which we deal with the items. So we'll come back to 9.2 and we can deal with 9.6, which is 142 Summer Street, Perth, change of use from warehouse to lodging house. Do I have a mover? Councillor Toppelberg, seconded. Councillor Loden.
Thank you. And so just one thing to note, and then I will propose an amendment. I do note that the condition 1.2 does tie the use to youth with a mission. I think that is critical. There has been some concern, whether it be for their tenure of lease, the landlord or otherwise, that there is the potential for it to become to be a lodging house or hostel run by an independent operator, and whilst the management plan would need to change, I think that's critical that it is tied to them. I did speak to it at the, and I'll grab the wording now, I did speak to the idea of a sunset clause, and not to say that it wouldn't be considered thereafter, but I do think the emerging planning framework in this area does lead me to believe that it would be prudent to certainly not to restrict it at an unreasonable time, but I will move the amendment to include a new 1.8, which would say that this approval for use of the premises as a lodging house and hostel is limited to a period of 10 years from the date of approval. If I get a seconder.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Gontaszewski.
So, given that representatives of the applicant are here, I won't look to include an advice note which says at which point you're welcome to reapply, and all other things being equal. I just think that sometimes we look at some of these uses when they're historical uses in areas that are undergoing transition, and we look at them and say, how did that happen, or what happens? It's no longer fitting with the character of the area. I think that Youth with a Mission provides, they are a significant part of that area that sits to the west of Lord Street, and is a significant contributor to the community in that area locally and more broadly. And I think that I think this is a really good change in activation. It was a signage warehouse, I think either signage company or storage facility and business there. So I think that this is a far better activation. We'll see people and activity, but I do note that some of what we and what EPRA had planned for that area in general over the next 10 years, that it may be that we need to relook at it. I think that gives them security of tenure to be able to carry out their fit out and to get their return on investment as far as that's concerned. It's not an unduly short limitation, but I do think it would be fair for the council of the day to be able to have another look at it and see whether it is the most appropriate use for that land going forward.
Councillor Gontaszewski, do you wish to add? The councillors, any comments in relation to the amendment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Back to the substantive. Are there any further comments in relation to this item? Seconded was Councillor Gontaszewski. Yes.
Okay. We look alike. So I guess I just wanted to say that I'm pleased to see the condition 1.2. I actually think that this condition gives me more surety around the car parking issues than condition 1.6. I am not in relation to a condition stating that residents are not permitted to park stand or leave vehicles on the premises or street or road reserve. So I'm very pleased to see that the condition to the operation. I guess I don't really have. I'm not confident that conditioning of this sort is likely to be successful in relation to parking, and so yes, happy to support this as it is now.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the item. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Director, are you ready for us to return to item 9.1, Director of Development Services? Yes, ready to go back to item 9.1.
Through you, Mayor Cole, council members, as council is now returning to an item that's earlier been adjourned and deferred, I'll just draw council's attention to clause 7.2 bracket 8 of the Standing Orders Local Laws, which simply says that on resuming an adjourned debate, the member who moved its adjournment, which in this instance was Councillor Buckles, is entitled to speak first. So just drawing that to council's attention.
Well, there you go. Who knew that about the standing orders? There's a test later. Yeah. So, so we have a mover, Councillor Buckles. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Toppelberg.
So I didn't move the original so that I could get to speak first on this. In particular, I'm just having a look at it there. Look, I mean, I guess I spoke in favour of the application, so obviously I don't know that our reasons for refusal are particularly strong, do I? So I'll just leave you to it.
Thank you for your insights. Councillor Toppelberg.
This is a really, really tough one because it's if we look in our, and I know that if this does go to a full hearing, I think we had one of, it's a significant cost burden to ratepayers, and I don't, that's not a reason to do or not do something if people believe in it. I struggled to raise my hand, but I on balance just fell on the side of struggling with it. But I do think that, as Councillor Gontaszewski pointed out, that there are fair arguments in relation to the car parking circumstance in our policies that clearly articulate that we have issues where we have parking restrictions, and also if this was a commercial development, not only would there be cash in lieu, but it would be doubled because it's a new development. So we have a clear policy framework which says where you've got a greenfield site, you have the ability to provide the car parking. It should be a starting point, not an end point. That being said, it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully the applicant will take on board the fact that it was a split vote and that there is consternation here, and will, in good faith, try and work together with the staff to achieve a better outcome for the whole site, and we can avoid the SAT expense and trouble for everybody.
Are there any further comments? I will just comment that I do take the advice on board that taking matters to SAT can become a cost impost for the city, but I do believe that given the degree of community concern about parking and the fact that, as Councillor Toppelberg states, this is a greenfield site, while it may just be one bay, I think that the added complications of those residents who ultimately live in this development not being eligible for car parking permits does make that bay particularly important to the livability of that development. And I just think that on parking, given that the R codes require such minimal level of parking, I do feel that it is something that is, in the overall scheme of things, becomes significant when we look at concessions on parking for new multiple dwelling developments within the city. So on that basis, I'm comfortable with supporting the refusal and happy to engage in the SAT process. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour of the alternative? All those against? Declare it carried. Councillor Buckles against. Thank you. So we'll move on now to item 9.2, the North Perth Town Centre Public Open Space. It's a mouthful. Have a mover. Councillor Gontaszewski, seconder. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I am happy to support this project, or the results of the community consultation. Support or endorse the location on the corner of View and Fitzgerald Street as the location for the development of a new public open space on the basis of the consultation that was undertaken. I note that there is an amendment and I would just like to put the amendment on the, I'm going to say buff paper.
Councillor Loden, as the seconder, are you happy to second the amendment? Thank you.
This amendment is relating to approving the working title for the project being amended. I don't know, I'd just like to put my vote in for North Perth Common, but yeah.
I'm also supportive of the North Perth Common title. I am.
Are there any further comments? We do need a council member to nominate to be on the working group. Councillor Toppelberg, are you nominating? Okay, is there anyone else that wishes to nominate? We can have an election if you wish.
May I just ask a question? I think this is in relation to just the changing of the title, that then when we go back to the substantive we would discuss. Would that be correct? Because I have questions about that one.
Through you, Mayor Cole, my advice would be the latter of which Councillor Gondaszewski mentioned, for the simple reason that the officer recommendation did provide a space for council to populate under item 4.2 or recommendation 4.2, which is the insertion of a council member's name as the additional member to that group.
Okay, so we are just dealing with the name, which is, I'd like to point out, a working title and will be subject to community consultation. And that is new clause 4, which will now read, approves the working title for the project being changed to North Perth Common. Are there any further comments on the working title? Councillor Hallett, the inventor of the working title, needs to be acknowledged. Congratulations.
I support the title, the working title. For me, it reinforces the notion of this public space being owned by the community and the importance of resources and infrastructure being held in common and not in private hands. And I think that's exactly what government is about.
Very nice, Councillor Hallett. Any further comments? Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, I support this title. I also support Councillor Toppelberg being on the working...
Councillor Murphy, we're going to come back to that one. We're just dealing with the working title.
Sure.
Councillor Loden.
Just want... I'm done? Clarification, I spoke already. Can I speak
well,
again?
you were the mover. You can only ask a question. Yes, so, okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour of North Perth Common? Declare it carried. Okay, we're back to the substantive.
I don't really have a great deal additional to add to this aside from my support. I understand we have to nominate a representative to the working group. I have one quick question in relation to the tasks as set out in the report. In terms of the working group, it appears that the working group will be consulted and provide advice and recommendations to the city in relation to the scope of works prior to procurement of a consultant to prepare the design concept for the space. I just had a question in relation to, or to seek assurance, potentially through you, Mayor, to the Director of Development Services in relation to opportunities for council to have some consideration or input into the scope of works at this early stage, potentially in an informal manner, not necessarily looking to add in more steps into the process. And I guess, yes, so I will ask my question in relation to what capacity there is for council to have some understanding or input of the proposed scope of works prior to procurement commencing.
Yes, through the Mayor, two steps will be involved where the council members will have an opportunity to comment. The first will be before the terms of reference. Did I say terms of reference? Sorry, I've got terms of reference on the mind. Before the scope of works is presented to the working group, it will be circulated to council members so that the council members are aware of what will be presented to the working group. And then following the working group's recommendations, again, the council members will have another opportunity to consider the working group's recommendations and the revised, if it's revised, the scope of works for final comment before the city goes out. Now, it may be that council members would like to discuss that at a workshop, but that email to council members will provide the opportunity for any council member to request it to come to a workshop, in which case we would present it to a workshop and discuss it informally through that process.
Thank you very much. I have nothing further on this and do not wish to nominate for the working group. I'm sure that will leave it everyone else to fight it out over.
We do have a nominee. Is there anyone else that wishes to nominate? Councillor Toppelberg, you are the nominee, so we'll put you down there. Does anyone wish to comment further on the substantive? Councillor Toppelberg?
So I'll move my amendment, which is just to include a member of the DAC as a non-voting member in the working group, or to invite, I should say, a member of the DAC. Do
you have a seconder? Councillor Gontaszewski? Any comment?
I will just... I had some discussion briefly with the Director of Development Services, and that was, I suppose, a process which he described, which was inclusive of the DAC to provide comments and otherwise, but I think it's really important both internally as council administration and our relationship with the DAC, but also in our public face, that our DAC is not a secret group of people that meet behind closed doors to deal only with development applications, but they are an esteemed group of industry professionals who provide design advice on a broad range of issues, and I think that where we're spending significant funds and effectively starting with our own almost greenfields sites, we should be engaging and working with them closely, and this is a great opportunity to do so. I did float the idea of even potentially having it as an open seat so that a member of the DAC would be present at each meeting, and whilst it does have some benefits, I think, because you don't then get the landscape designer or the architect's view of what they would do with the space. You get more general design advice from industry professionals, but I think that we'll work through that together with them. But in principle, I think it should become the norm in what we do when we have significant spending of public funds on design-based projects.
Sorry, through the Mayor, if I may just add to, based on Councillor Toppelberg's comment that one of the DAC members would be invited. We could change the wording if you would like to clarify that they be invited, or we can leave it as it is.
Given that we can call for a nomination, but I just don't. We can't oblige. If none of them wish to do so, we can't oblige them to do so because it's not part of the remit of what they're sitting on the committee of the DAC. That's all. That's why I thought that would be. I'm assuming we will get at least one, but I don't think we can require it of the DAC.
Through the Mayor, that would be the same for North Perth Local, so I'm happy to leave it as it is.
Can I also just ask whether we would need to pay the DAC member the DAC sitting fee that they are required to be paid when they're sitting in a DAC meeting?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, there's no provision for the city to pay the DAC member, and the city wouldn't pay the DAC member for their involvement in this process. It would be completely voluntary and at their discretion.
My question was in regards to payment, so I'm glad to hear that. I don't support the motion. I think DAC members have their role, but I look to what happened in the Leederville Enhancement Group and the Beaufort Street Piazza, and I'm just wondering if anyone can remember from them whether we had a DAC member in either one of those enhancement groups.
Through the Mayor, my understanding is that we didn't have a DAC member involved.
So it was a rhetorical question. Sorry. I say, no, I mean, I'm serious. They are excellent outcomes. And we didn't, what we had was, we had people give us design advice. We had our own staff. We had experienced councillors who were also members of the community who were users of that space, who knew those spaces really well. We did community consultation. The then Mayor interfered a little bit, so we got that sorted out as well. She had her own ideas. they are excellent outcomes, and the Oxford Street Reserve is, I think, one of the best outcomes that the city's had of a space in terms of activation and what it has done to transform that end of the street. No disrespect to DAC members, but I personally, in many of the design issues that have come to council, haven't agreed with their views, and I acknowledge their expertise, but I think we can get as good, if not a better outcome, without having a DAC member. I've no objection to them participating necessarily and having their input. I just don't feel that we need them on this particular working group, and we haven't needed them before for two other excellent outcomes. And Braithwaite Park, I don't believe we had a DAC member on that either. That was a community-driven and content expert-driven type of project, and that's been a great outcome for the community as well.
Any further comments? Look, I'll speak to the amendment. I'm glad that we are not considering paying the DAC member. Our DAC members are local community members as well as having expertise, so they do reside within the City of Vincent. Look, I think it's actually a really good opportunity to call upon, to invite them to provide their skills and experience in the project, given that they are either urban designers, architects or landscape architects. So if we have a local passionate DAC member who's prepared to give up their time and provide some expertise to the early stage of this process without being a voting member, then I'm supportive and welcoming of that. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? All those against? Thank you, Councillor Harley. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments? Councillor Loden.
Thought I'd use the opportunity to say what I was going to say under the proposed amendment. I like the name of North Perth Common, but I think we have a opportunity here to identify an appropriate Aboriginal name to be included in this naming of this public open space. Prior to settlement of this area, to my understanding, this area was sort of freshwater bodies and swamps, and was a very common food gathering site for the Aboriginal people, the Noongar people of this area. And I have no doubt that somewhere in the North Perth area there would be a number of sites of significance, and that appropriately consulted Aboriginal community could give us a really appropriate name for this site that would then provide this nice connectivity from there through to Hyde Park, Weld Square, and any other sites that we might identify as well that we could name and recognise the traditional owners of the Noongar people. So I hope that that can be considered as part of this process going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Are there any further comments? Councillor Buckles.
I just wanted to comment on this one. I think Councillor Harley mentioned the open space at the bottom of Leederville, which has been a great success, and I also took Murray Street Piazza has been a real success, but I think they're sort of, you did the project and the success was instant, but this one isn't going to be an instant success. It's an interesting spot, but I think that when you come back to North Perth in 20 years, this is actually going to be the start of a real, you'll see this dragged through North Perth, linking up to Angove, and I think people will actually, not that I want to claim any particular credit for it, but I think this is actually a really interesting and almost visionary decision to put this here with what you can see in the thoughts of the staff and the way this is going to go through. And I think this will be I think it's a real little defining moment of the centre of North Perth that I really, really look forward to coming back to in the future. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Buckles. Look, I'd just like to comment that I completely agree. I think this is a really exciting project, and I think it's because it is part of a bigger picture. And the concept is that we start by doing this rectangular development in a very visual part of North Perth that has the dual effect of slowing traffic and creating that space in the North Perth town centre, but then with the work that is also contemplated in the report that will happen as part of the stage 2 of this project to develop that further through the View Street car park and to provide that connection through to Angove Street. For me, it's a very exciting project, and it has that longer term vision. So I wholeheartedly agree, Councillor Buckles, and I think that that this is the start of something bigger and the start of something that can grow and connect North Perth really well. So I think that that was really great that came through. The staff have responded to the feedback on the location from the community. I think that the consultation results were really quite impressive, that we did have 133 online survey responses from the community, and we know that is a really good response when we put something out for comment, and that there was also some pretty detailed seeking of opinion from the landowners and North Perth Local, that the landowners that are around that area. So look, I think that the location was definitely indicated as preferred, and I think that it does have that room to develop and grow. So really happy to be supporting this, and it's a highly visual location, and really excited about what the future can be, particularly when you factor in, I can't remember if it's lot number, which is the house that is currently owned, number 4 with View Street, which is owned by the City of Vincent. I think that presents a really exciting opportunity for the future development. So very happy to see this this project start, and can't wait to see what the concept plans come back with. Any further comments? Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say I echo that, and I'm also excited to see Councillor Toppelberg being voted on the working group in his capacity on the Arts Advisory Group, and the current priority for Council to embed the arts in our operations, and so I look forward to his input in that capacity.
You're going to be held to account there. Okay, well, if there are no further comments, I'll put the item. All those in favour, declare the North Perth Commons proposal carried.
Just, Madam Mayor, I'm aware there's a staff member in the audience that's probably waiting for item 10.3.
Hello, James. All right, we'll go to item 10.3, which is tender number 535 of 17, provision of general cleaning services at Beatty Park Leisure Centre. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Loden. And a seconder, Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I feel like I'm the tender guy. So I have an amendment which I'll speak to in a second. I guess we are, and I've said this before obviously, that we have challenges around the way we run our tender process, which is why it's been referred to for review by our auditor, and I hope that once that review comes back and the new process is implemented, it will make these things a lot easier. The challenge we have here is that there is a degree of subjectivity in how you do the evaluation. There's 3 tenders that are very close, and depending on how you decide your percentages and how those numbers are allocated, you get a different result. Fundamentally, I think the process that administration used for doing this is appropriate. That's what they have to follow the process, and it is a line call between which one you would choose. I don't agree with the recommendation, which is why I've put forward an alternative recommendation for multi-clean. Both of these entities have the capability and capacity to deliver the service in Beatty Park to the standard that is required of our community. The distinction between the two is that multi-clean is roughly 80% of the cost of the proposed tender. So that's their benefit. Their downside of their submission is that they didn't score as highly on their demonstrate.
Councillor Loden,
cool.
We just need to ensure that you are talking to the substantive motion. So I think you're okay, but just to be mindful of the fact that you're not talking to an alternative motion at this point.
Can I get some advice on? So I would like to move the alternative, or how does that work?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the alternative can only be considered by council if the recommendation that's put forward is lost on the vote.
So I will not be supporting the officer recommendation because I feel that the second listed tenderer, Multi-Clean, represents the best value for our community. With at 80% of the cost, that's a significant cost benefit to our community, and although it didn't score as highly on the financial sustainability, it is an organisation that has existed for a long period of time and should be capable of sustaining its operations for the duration of this contract. So, yeah.
Who was the second? Councillor Buckles.
I must admit I'm happy to support the officer recommendation on this one, and I totally appreciate Councillor Loden's rationale for considering an alternate. My only concern is that sitting only 0.2 on a total score below Multi-Clean is Southern Cross Cleaning Service that has an equivalent cost saving, again, above in terms of the weekly price here. So I guess I don't know why I wouldn't go to that one, not the first. And I just tend to think that the staff have taken a rigorous assessment and they've come to their decision, and I'm happy to endorse that decision at this stage. Cheers.
Councillors?
I'll also be supporting the officer's recommendation. Tender processes are never easy to look at from the outside because obviously the people sitting on the tender panels have all the details in front of them, including things like on cost for extra services, etc. I do take the point, though. It's also not the first time that issues have been raised, not about the governance of the tender process, although that did happen on one occasion as well, but about the subjectivity and about if you were really pushed, how could you articulate what 0.2 or 0.5 means, and how could you evidence that? And that is always the challenge in tender processes. But and I do acknowledge that there's a cost differentiation without having the documents in front of me to know whether that cost would be eaten up in additional services or other things, product prices. And I have had this exact experience with a cleaning tender where I did go with a lower cost one, only to find it's actually cost me more money in the long term. So I'll be going with the officer's recommendation on this one.
Councillors? Councillor Gontashevsky.
Just to note that that through the process, the report notes that the panel noted that the submission received by Multi-Clean included limited detail in relation to financial stability, and that this was requested but a response wasn't received. And I note that part of the difference in terms of the difference in scoring is in relation to the lowest score on financial stability. So in light of that, I mean, I think also, you know, it is demonstrated here that we have had a rigorous process. I am in favour of continued improvements to our tendering process, and that is in train. But in this instance, I do support the officer recommendation.
Councillors? Councillor Murphy?
Just a quick question, just around the legalities. If there was a tender process and scored in the way that it has been, and council essentially vetoes it, what would the potential ramifications for that be from a legal perspective? Do we have discretion to be able to do that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's a good question that Councillor Murphy raises, and the answer all hinges on the grounds for Council's alternate reason. If Council chose to exercise the discretion that it actually does have to decide to accept or not accept the recommendation of administration and the tender evaluation panel, then the sole basis for Council's consideration needs to meet two essential criteria. Firstly, that Council has regard only to the evaluation criteria that form part of the request for tender and nothing else. And secondly, that Council must be satisfied that the tender that is awarded represents the most advantageous tender for the provision of those services.
Great, thanks. On that basis, I'm not sure I'll be. I think I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Councillors, I just have a question. There was quite a lot of email traffic on this item, and there was some analysis between the recommended tenderer and another tenderer in relation to the hours of cleaning offered, and I just wanted to clarify, was that the Director of Technical Services, if you could clarify that particular email that looked at the cleaning hours provided by one tenderer versus the other, was that multi-clean? Just struggling to recall given the volume of emails.
Through the Chair, it was actually the third tenderer, Southern Cross Cleaning. When we worked backwards, we came to the conclusion they weren't dedicating the staff or the hours necessary to clean the centre successfully, whereas Key Clean and Multi-Clean were of a similar ratio in respect of hours.
And I'd also just like to have some perspective from the Director of Community Engagement. I did raise the question about the cleanliness, given that the recommended tenderer is the current cleaner. Just for the benefit of the record, could you please talk us through any complaints and responsiveness to complaints?
Through you, Mayor Cole, there has been no concerns from a facility operations perspective with the performance of this contractor, so that has not been a concern from Beatty Park Leisure Centre's perspective.
And Director for Technical Services, do you have any comments in relation to a preference, a strong preference for Key Clean? I guess it really comes down to your rankings. You don't feel that you need to elaborate further if you feel that that is sufficiently answers the question.
Through the Chair, I do agree that sufficiently answers the question that was assessed by the tender panel based on the criteria, and that's the conclusion they came to. It was the preferred tenderer.
Any further comments? Councillor Toppelberg?
Yeah, I will comment. I'm with my esteemed colleague to my left on the war against tenders, if you want to call it as such. I think that we do have a lot of work to do, but on this particular one, what's actually proposed, and if you look at the proposed wording of the alternate, it's actually seeking to alter the weighting effectively, because what it says is price was given a weighting of 35%, and if you look at the key area where there's divergence, it's the financial history and evidence of stability is given 10%. Effectively, what that's saying is that in the alternative is to actually stretch that out, and I don't think that that's appropriate in this circumstance. I think that the appropriate weighting has been given to price, which is far more than any of the other criteria, and therefore, whilst the saving is appreciated, I'm comfortable with the officer recommendation.
Councillors, are there any further comments or questions in relation to the motion? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour of the motion? All those against? Declare it lost. Declare it carried. My apologies. One vote against. Okay. We are now moving to item 9.7, back to development services. This is number 459, Fitzgerald Street, alterations to an existing hotel. We're just, Councillor Murphy's just leaving the room. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Buckles, seconder. Councillor Gonchevsky. Councillor Buckles.
Thank you. I'm entirely comfortable with the officer recommendation. Cheers.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
Same with me. No further comments.
Any comment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. All right. Okay, we'll go to item 10.2, William Street. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Hallett.
I'm happy to support the officer recommendation as it's proposed. This is consistent with how we've introduced traffic management in other parts of the area, so it seems appropriate.
Councillor Hallett.
Yeah, I guess it addresses an outstanding measure, so I support the motion to do that. And I just think we need to remember that the provision of parking isn't free. It does cost us, and unless those using it pay for it, it's our residents and commercial entities that do end up subsidising it. I don't think it'll have enormous impacts on revenue for the city. I don't think it'll have enormous economic impacts on local commercial outlets. The issues that venues and commercial outlets in the city are facing are far broader economic issues, that most of which go beyond our remit. I guess for consolation, that there's a number of measures in our budget for the next year that do look at supporting and enhancing opportunities for businesses in Vincent to prosper, and I think that will far outweigh any minor impact of parking changes.
Councillor Gondaszewski.
Just a quick question in relation to point 2 of the recommendation. And forgive me if I'm being a little vague, just wondering whether, if I can clarify that we're introducing 2 hours 2-hour restrictions between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m, and that during that time users will pay for parking. And then between 7 p.m, and I'm wondering if it should be 12 a.m, that it's paid parking but without restrictions. So I'm just wondering if we should be correcting that 12 p.m. to actually read a.m.
Director?
Yeah, through the chair. Yes, it was meant to be midnight, so my apologies for that error.
May I put forward an amendment to correct recommendation 2 so that it reads that paid ticket parking is between 7 p.m. and 12 a.m. 7 days per week?
Do I have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Hallett. Does anyone wish to discuss? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried.
I'd just like to say that the substance and yes, now the recommendation as written, I'm very supportive.
Any further comments? Councillor Harley?
I have a question in regards to the machines and just wonder whether this is a common problem, and hopefully it won't be here. So where we set a restriction, I'll use Oxford Street and the Oxford Street car parks as my most recent examples. Where we set a restriction for, say, 7 p.m, up to 7 p.m, you can only do 2 hours. But if you're wanting to stay from a time period which is from 6 o'clock through to 8 o'clock, there's an issue with the ticket machines not issuing tickets. That is, you simply can't purchase a ticket for the period after 7 p.m. if you're purchasing that ticket prior to 7 p.m, which actually essentially means we're missing out on either revenue or people are risking fines. And I just wonder, given that this will be the same type of issue where people may wish to stay after 7 o'clock and to pay for that parking, whether that could please be checked out, because it's occurred to me in 3 locations, 2 on Oxford Street and 1 in the Oxford Street car park, and I've watched the same thing happen to other people, and they walk away, they either don't pay or they get irritated that they've got to come back out of the movie in an hour and a half's time to buy a ticket for a time period for which they've been willing to pay for. Does that make sense to the relevant directors? Yeah. So just while this is on before us.
Director, do you wish to comment?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I wasn't aware of that particular issue, but I do understand that, so I'll certainly have it checked out tomorrow.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Sorry, I did miss 10.1, so we're going back to that, which is the Capital Works update. This is the item in which I will be presiding, but not voting or commenting. Do I have a mover and seconder for this item? Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to support the carry forward of these capital works activities. I do note that we saw 29% carryover from 2015-16. We're now seeing 24% carryover for 2016-17. I'm concerned that we might be in the same position next year, but I recognise these scopes are things we've agreed to do and that are important for our community, so I'm happy to support the officer recommendation.
Councillor Hallett, anything further? Does anyone have any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously by those who are voting. We're now moving on to item 12.2, Proposed Dogs Amendment Local Law 2017. Do I have a mover and seconder? Moved, Councillor Murphy. Seconded, Councillor Gontaszewski.
Yeah, look, I'm supportive of this policy, and I would just like to bring to everyone's attention the further amendment made during the last week, which is to remove entirely Clause 5 of the local dog policy. So this will mean that we take our own policy out, and the Dog Act, the State Government Dog Act, will come into play, which means essentially that dogs will be allowed into non-food businesses and public spaces throughout the city, as per the State Government Act, but still not allowed into food businesses. I know this has been a bit of a problem for quite a few people over a couple of years, and so I think it will be good to remove a bit of red tape and allow dogs in and out as same as humans or similar to humans. Yeah, that's all I've got to say, really. Thank you to Michael Quirk and Tim for organising it.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
Yes, I'm similarly pleased to Councillor Murphy in relation to allowing private business owners to the option of welcoming dogs into their offices or their stores. I believe actually makes Vincent a more inclusive place to shop, work and own a business. I don't think we're losing any protections, but we're giving business the opportunity to create a new market for themselves in some ways, should they wish to make their premises pooch friendly, and promoting it as such.
Thank you, Councillor Harley.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. I agree with the previous comments. There's the pink economy, and there's the baby economy, and there's the Irish economy in Vincent. We've got a number of economies, and the dog economy should not be underestimated, including them as a lobby group. But there are a number of businesses who I know actively promote this through their websites, Diabolic Books. You can go in there, they talk about how many customers they get in who just go there so they can take their dogs. I know of a number of hairdressers. There's a number of places around the city. It won't be compulsory for businesses, but I do think there's a recent article that talks about how, and I love dogs, I think people know that, but I think that the recent article about how dogs bring community together and actually create conversations where conversations may not happen, and neighbours getting to know each other, I think is a really wonderful thing about living in the city, Vincent, and something people comment to me about all the time. So I think it's a great step forward, and good on those businesses who wish to allow dogs in, and no problems with businesses who don't wish to, because they'll have a choice.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. And we're moving on to the last item for this evening, and that is the Corporate Business Plan, item 13.1. Does anyone wish to move this item? Councillor Toppelberg, seconded. Councillor Loden.
Thank you. Rather than the I'm just trying to think of the right terminology. Rather than the hearsay that we heard earlier in the evening from the public gallery about the goings-on at Vincent and the buy-in of staff, council and into delivering outcomes for the community, I think this is a far better measure of it. and my understanding of the process, having had my interactions with staff through the organisation, is that the clarity with which the direction that the city is going, and as a corporate entity as well, and in line with the plans of the integrated planning framework, is actually a significant positive contributor to the experience of working at Vincent, and to be working collaboratively, and people to have a clear understanding of the direction they're going in. I think for that, that the CEO should be commended for his leadership of the process, and the directors as well. I wouldn't normally talk in those terms, but considering the somewhat outrageous and disparaging comments that were made at the beginning of this meeting, which were based on a few anecdotal circumstances, I think that this is a document that we can happily hang our hat on going forward. It, for the first time in a long time, clearly defines for internally in the organisation how we work. It gives people who are current or future employees a clear direction as to how that is integrated beyond what goes on in the chatter and what we see and read and hear in the community. It actually translates it into workable results, and I look forward to the integration of the strategic community plan going forward. And as I say, I think that I would not normally have commented, but I think given the what was said earlier tonight, that this is actually fact on paper and is something that the staff and broadly the city itself should be very proud of as a document that guides our direction and gives those clear priorities.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Murphy.
Make a quick comment. Yeah, congratulations to Len, and I love in the CEO's message, your final closing paragraph. The corporate business plan showcases a number of new initiatives to continue making Vincent an amazing place where our residents are proud to call home, where businesses thrive, and where people want to visit. And then the various actions that we're taking around that, and I think that really sums it up well. So congratulations.
Thank you. Any further comments? Just like to also say thank you to CEO and staff, particularly to the CEO for all of the reasons outlined. We do appreciate that this is a body of work that has taken some time to achieve, and it really sets us on the right course. It's a very clear, concise document that we can show the community to let them know exactly what is up at the City of Vincent and all of the work that's going on. And when I read it through again today, I did think, geez, there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm really impressed and proud that Council and Administration is taking on this body of work together. So thanks to all involved. Any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll put the item. All those in favour? I declare it carried. That was our last report for the evening, so I will declare the meeting closed at 9:21 p.m. Thank you, everybody.